Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by Little Shop of Horrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. All righty, I'm joined here again tonight by Mr. Jeff Adams. We had such a great conversation last time, and we decided to do a part two, and he was gracious enough to agree to do that. So thank you again, Mr. Adams, and thank you for being here.
Not a problem. I greatly appreciate you having me back on here again.
Well, excellent. There's definitely some notes through our conversation that I thought would be well worth following up on and kind of getting to know a little bit more. Again, let's go over where did you start? What did you start keeping? What was the first? I remember the first animal you produced ended up being a little hybrid animal. Is where you learned your scale counts. What came after that? What was your big breeding projects?
Oh God, and did all kinds of stuff. I mean, we were always traipsing through Salado Creek for people from San Antonio. You know, Salado Creek was a major waterway on the northeast side of town, and it was so different back then. There was deep holes, crystal clear water. You could see fish swimming in it. Totally different than how it is today, obviously. And so we were always down there, and so we've tons and tons of checkered garters back then, and big Texas rat snakes. I mean, we would find monstrous Linheimeri hanging out of the oak trees over at Oak Grove Elementary, and take turns at going up and trying to pull them down. And because everyone went up there and got them down, just got eaten alive. So I mean, it's been everything from Splendida to a lot of all your native stuff. Lots of checker garters back then, ribbon snakes. We used to get up, kind of figured out that if we got up, and this is in middle school, we would get up at 4:30 in the morning, probably around 4:30, and take off and go down there with pillowcases and wade through the water about waist deep down into Salado Creek and the overhanging branches and grass. And I mean, we literally filled pillowcases up with water snakes. You know, just seeing how many we could catch in a morning before school. And I mean, they were that plentiful in the wee hours of the morning. They were sitting up there eating fish, just trying to get the fish down and hanging off of the limbs back then. So, I mean, done a little bit of everything. And then once got old enough to drive, started making these road trips. Even, as I alluded to before, even before we were old enough. My mom heard the podcast. She goes, "I didn't give you permission." I said, "Yeah, you did. I was with Riley." And she goes, "Well, I thought Riley was driving." I said, "No, we all took our own vehicles. We were all driving all over West Texas." Riley was an older gentleman that we knew, and so she thought we were piled in there. And she goes, "Well, you didn't have permission for that." And statute of limitations run out on that, obviously. Um,
Still get a
but
spanking.
yeah, no, and started going down south back when everything was protected. Although I'm a pretty good law-abiding citizen, have a lot of different state and federal licenses. There's occasionally a law that's just made to be broken, and that was one of them where they had protected a lot of animals with no just cause, and so back in high school, going down south, and then even going out west. That came a little bit later, but going out west looking for alterna. And back then you just had these field guides with sketches, but even at that, you saw these sketches of an alterna or a milk snake, and you were just, oh my God, look at that. It wasn't something that you could see the photos and all the eye candy that we have now. And but I was just always attracted to that. I'll never forget where I was at. I think I lost you there. You there still? Yeah, I don't know what happened. So yeah,
Oh,
it broke up for a second.
right
But
there.
there was a gentleman named
Yes,
Bo
sir. Yes,
Elliott, and
sir.
it
You're
was his
back now.
very
I can hear you
first
just
time
fine.
back in the
All good.
in the early to mid '80s to see an alterna, live alterna, in a private collection, and the to see that thing firsthand, and I've never forgot it. I mean, just the most beautiful looking animal. And after that, I was just hooked on the idea of going out looking for Alterna out in West.
And what year was that you said that was the first time you saw one in captivity?
Oh God, it was oh man, probably early to not too early, but somewhere between 83 and 86 probably was the first time physically saw one in someone's collection and actually got to touch an Alterna.
Yeah. What color phase was that animal? And any other backstory of that animal? Do you know?
No, I don't. Because everything was secretive back then. I mean, these animals were put on a list, and there's a few people that had them pre-ban, but everyone was kind of an underground type of deal back then. And so I don't know where it's from, but it was it's Blair's phase, light phase, and if I had to guess, probably a generic, but if not, Langtree, because you know. 277 hadn't broken open by then. Juno was still real iffy back then. I mean, people just didn't have a whole lot of areas or ideas of where to go, and they a little bit of Fort Davis, a little bit of River Road and Langtree, and that's where people went. I remember Joe Forks and I and Keith Amelung, were hunting Loma before Adam Sweetman went up there and found all those snakes, but without much luck. And matter of fact, Keith Amelung had drift fences up along the Dolan Falls Road, just off the edge of the road where you couldn't see him. And I'd gone up there with him, looking at his drift fences. And I don't know if he ever did any good with that. Next time I see him, I'm gonna have to ask him if he ever found anything. But he had set up these long drift fences, and then come by and check them to see if any snakes were crawling along it. And there wasn't a whole lot of luck up there back then. I think Earl Turner was probably finding some things up there. He had access to the old highway on some private ranches, but 277 up there at Loma just had not broke open for whatever reason. I mean, it was just a handful of people that hunted it. Another guy that's passed away now, Greg Toady, hunted it, and but nobody had really found anything till Adam Sweetman went up there one time, and then just all of a sudden it busted wide open. And Keith Amelung had done the same thing back then. He was virtually living out there, and was finding quite a few of animals up on Juneau Road. He had a little method that he would run, and just make a little short run back and forth, and he would clock it so that there was less of a chance of an animal getting across the road without him finding it. And of course, nobody was up there back then. There was only a couple of snake hunters, and then the tire testers came along, and that was it coming down Juneau Road. There was no traffic, and so you didn't find a whole lot of roadkills up there unless the tire testers hit them because there was no traffic.
And that's so interesting too. I mean, so what was the common belief back then? I guess a more general question, but about this and tangent off. If there's anything we go, oh, we thought this, but what were some of the early beliefs? What did you think about uh, alterna dispersion throughout or populations throughout West Texas? Did you think that they were very pocketed or were they everywhere? What was the mindset on that?
No, I mean back then most everything was kind of more pocketed. Even the Pecos High Bridge and stuff like that wasn't doing a whole lot. Then a few people had come along, Bob Aceto and stuff, and they started hunting those cuts there at Comstock and found some things. Greg Toady was living there working on his. I don't even know if he had finished his master's, but he was working on that forever out there. Picked a pretty complicated topic, and so he was finding stuff right there at Comstock and kept it quiet. It's kind of like Buzz Ross over in Fort Davis. Buzz Ross had everyone convinced that it would just take an act of God to find a Davis animal, and as more and more people have gone up there, it wasn't as difficult as Buzz made it out, and he intentionally did that, and I can't blame him. Rather than having a whole bunch of people in his backyard, Buzz could go out just about any time, and there was just a handful of people that were hunting up there. But yeah, I mean, most of the people thought it was real limited. there was some flip flopping, early on, and even up through that time as to, they were called Lamprepeltis mexicana alterna, even, and way before that, they had them divided into two different species or subspecies of the alterna and the blairii, and that was a major argument and big time discussion had gone on as to whether those were actually two different animals or the same subspecies. And I know Whirler and Jack Reed and that was a big argument with Blair over that. And saying no, that's not right. You can't do that, and blah blah blah. And so there was a lot of squabbling and argument back then because so much of that stuff was so new in West Texas. People just didn't have a whole lot of information, but they knew Langtree because, of course, the Chamberlains, the famous Blair's Cave, they had a cave and they could always go to this cave and the snake gods would drop one out like a slot machine, And what it was is they were all out on the road driving it and you hit Langtree during the key time and spend the hours doing it, you're going to find a snake out there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's got a good population. It's close to the river, and for whatever reason, it's just a good population of it. But no, I mean, it's a lot of people, a lot of things, crazy things were found because, like I said, people would start back around Uvalde, Brackettville, um, Eagle Pass, and they would just start driving. They didn't know where to go, and that was the other deal is, and I don't know who came up with it, the cut hunting, but you got to remember that there was the old highway which you can see off on the side of Highway 90 and stuff, but some of this didn't have as many cuts. The road went up and down a lot more, and then when they redid the highway, they cut it out and blasted it, and that was, they opened it back up even more back in the about the mid '80s again. So it had gone through several different deals of moving it over and widening it and doing different things like that. But people were driving the roads. That's where they were finding. They're just finding them out on the roads, crossing the roads on a night. Whether that was on the Lane Tree Dirt or just out on Highway 90. And then somewhere along the way, people started looking at the cuts. And of course, now with all the traffic, I mean, that's a big thing is looking at the cuts. It's not as many snakes are getting out on the road, no doubt. But there's people that have gone out and found 30, 40 of these snakes out on the road, and that's predominantly all how they hunted was just driving the roads looking for them, and they're not cut hunters and stuff like that. There's still a few of those guys that just drive the shoulders looking for them, and they've done very well.
Yeah, yeah. That's a constant debate that I have uh, with the group of people that I get to go with, and you know, it's it's interesting. It's over time, sooner or later you put the time in,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
you'll
yeah, and
find
it,
one.
and too many people, alternate a little bit different. Mexican milk snakes, they do like it pretty dark. I mean, you just don't find a whole lot of them coming out during daylight hours. I mean, although they have, but there's been alterna found during daylight hours, late morning. I've found them at odd times. I was out walking cuts and Langtree early looking for lizards and scraping the shelves along the rock cuts, and it wasn't even dark yet. And a big male alterna comes crawling down off the top of the cut. I just saw something out of my peripheral vision. I look up, I go, oh my God. And it was coming, looked like it was coming out of a crack. And then I realized, no, it was coming down the edge of the crack. And so uh, my big fat butt jumped way up in there and snagged it off the cut. But it wasn't even dark. I was looking for lizards when that animal was coming out, and he come crawling down the cut and saw me. By the time I saw him, we both went, "Oh crap!" and and I've found driving along just looking with your eye looking at the cuts and have found alterna. The only gravid alterna I've ever found was on Highway 90 on the shoulder, just looking at the cuts with the naked eye with no lights. wasn't fully dark yet, and I used to hunt out in uh, Pumpville area, and so one night in mid October was nice and warm and out bow hunting, and decided to go out with a buddy of mine, wasn't even into snakes, and just had a mag light back then. Wasn't rechargeable, wasn't anything. Just one of these mag lights, and he's hanging out the window and found a little small Alterna morph out west of Langtree on a cut, little hatchling. That's when a lot of the hatchlings are found is in October, depending on what the weather does. But yeah, we were out there with a mag light and him hanging out the window, driving down the shoulder because you couldn't see anything with that mag light very well. You know,
Yeah.
not like today's lights and found that one. That was I think that one was eighth in the year that I found something like that.
Wow.
That was a good year back in the early '90s.
Wow. Yeah, for sure. That's a. I mean, could you imagine you're like that now? You know.
It
Th-
happens, but I just don't have the time. It's just a matter. Back then it wasn't uncommon. My son was little, and we would just go hunting, and then back then you would go hunting and drive all the way home, sleep for an hour, maybe 2 hours, and get up and go to work, and you could do that. Now, oh God, no, I couldn't even think of doing that now. But we used to do that, and so there was some years that I would be out west as much as 30 nights a year, and you're going to find some things when you do that, and um, it also it equates to a lot of man hours have gone in just to find the snakes I have. I've had better luck. Seems like finding annulata, but of course I managed ranches at one time down there and spent quite a bit of time. But I'm up to I quit counting just because I forgot, but probably somewhere around through the years 55 annulata down there. So had pretty decent luck, and I think at times annulata can be harder to find than alterna.
yes, sir. Yeah. No, I've not. I've not. I've only found one milk snake in all my time of herping, and I've put a good amount of time into South Texas, but um, yeah, only one, and a guy
Really?
ran over right in front of me. And
Yeah.
it was like my first, you know, I don't know, probably year into going down there. I was like, oh, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it can be tough, but I think a lot of times people hunt it too late in the year. When it starts warming up, um, it gets harder and stuff, and so usually go annulata hunting early in the year, and then alterna hunting later in the year, um, and then of course got to have the rain and stuff like that. But I've had some very good fall times down south, and I don't think that many people go down south during the fall. They tend to still go out west, because alterna hunting can be very well in the month of September. But there's also a whole lot of guys really big into lepidus and other stuff like that, and it gets to be a pretty good time of year to go out west is in the fall, and get to see a lot of animals out moving, trying to get those last couple of meals in before hibernation.
Yes, sir. Yeah, yeah. No, it's South Texas is definitely a lot of fun, and I don't do it as much as I used to for sure, but I spent a lot of time down there and had a lot of fun.
Well,
So,
back in the '80s, we had some pretty wet years, right? And
uh,
and so used to go down there, and I was telling Jerry Salmon this. I mean, there was times back then that you just couldn't even dodge the checker garters. They were everywhere. Same thing with spadefoots. You'd hear them pop under your tires. You try to zigzag everywhere, but they were literally that thick. And I've gone down south and found over 70 atrox in the night, and I mean I've had nights where just hundreds upon hundreds of snakes were seen in a night, almost all checker garters, but I mean they would just literally be everywhere back then, and you don't find them like that now. But I've had some pretty good nights where go out and find 30 plus checker garters in the night, but nothing like you did back then, where I mean they were just darting out on the roads, and back then there wasn't a whole lot of traffic down at Four Corners, and um, you and I just before the started talking a little bit about Somerset, and there was times we used to start our hunt by Somerset and drive all the way down to Tilden, go down south of Tilden and back again. And, you'd be up all night, and we talked about the last time, but you just pull over and go to sleep on the picnic bench. There was picnic benches along Highway 16, and there was one way up on the tall hill right there at 624 by 16 that all the kids were partying at a fair, so they tore it down. But we used to sleep up at that one, and there was a lot of unusual things that would get found that way. There would a lot of stuff just wasn't even documented. I mean, there wasn't real good documentation of where different animals were being found at and things like that. And so there was a lot of neat things that happened, and of course, around Somerset, we found all kinds of, what people consider to be trash snakes. You had your target specimen, and then of course you always, now we look at it and realizing that getting south of Tilden or so, more into the thorn scrub really, it picked up a lot more. Even though you could find stuff, south of Jordanton, it was you had to get down there a little bit further, and but we used to just take and just start driving, around the Somerset area, meet up, and that's where we'd start, and then go and just drive all night. And now I look at it and I go, oh God, I couldn't do that. I need that hotel, a bed, and a shower now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That my I think my most you know productive night was in South Texas. A few years ago, and I believe it was somewhere in the 50 animal range, and it was like, wow, that is a lot of snakes, and there's a lot of garter snakes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I found a lot of rattlesnakes. I've had several times in the 30s for Western Diamondback for Atrox. There was a night back in oh God, probably would have been the late 80s, I'm guessing. And I used to be friends and still am Jerry Troop, and of course Jerry Troop, would buy snakes, and a lot of people always kept Jerry Troop close because they always wanted to buy annulata from him and things like that. And he was the one that got the striped annulata that come out down there, Bruni, and then some weird annulata have come out there. That's where the transformer phase, for whatever reason, some weird color phases and patterns have come out of the Bruni area. And I actually used to have keys to his house. He had a little trailer there, and I'd just crash in the trailer. Back then, he asked me, because I always would stay down there. He goes, "Hey, I need some spade foots, so if they're out, let me know." Well, I knew that if I didn't pick some up, that then he's going to say, "Hey, well, go with me and go pick up spadefoot." So we're coming down 2050, and I told my wife at the time, I said, "Hey, just let me out." I had a little Isuzu pickup truck, right, and so they had the little smoother, straight sides on it. I said, "Just let me out, drive slow, and I'm just going to walk along down the road down 2050 and just toss a few spadefoots in the back of the truck." He needed some for hognose food for somebody needed. They were breeding hognose. And he needed a bunch of toads for hognose food and stuff. And so I'm walking along and I just tossing these spadefoots. I mean, they're just literally everywhere as I'm walking down the road. They're hopping, and I'm tossing them in the bed of this Isuzu truck. And so I pull up there, and Jerry says, "Hey, are there any toads out?" I said, "Yeah." I said, I throw you about 30 in the back of the truck. You can come get them." And I get back over there, and there was probably only two left in the back of the truck. And so, as fast as I was putting them in there, because those little Suzu trucks had short deals and they were straight up and down, they didn't curve over. They were climbing the hell out of the back of the truck, I guess. And so, when I got into Bruni coming off 2050, had two spadefoots left, and I went, "Well, I had you a whole bunch of them, Jerry." And things were different. There was a lot more Mexican hognose back then. Too much of the grasslands have petered out, and there was a lot of Mexican hognose. They were not that difficult to find down south like have become now. And same thing with Berlanderi. I mean, there was a lot of Berlanderi. You had a lot more box turtles, obviously, and stuff as well, but lots of Berlanderi everywhere. As a kid, we used to deer hunt down in Zapata, and even back then I was probably about 12 years old, and I was down there one summer, and we were just messing around fishing or something, one of the stock tanks, and there was a cabin there, and there was always crap that hunters had there, and there was a roll of carpeting, and I rolled that carpeting over and found my first ever long nose. I was like 12, and just as I did, I got bit by something on the inside of my thigh, and I went, oh, man, what the hell was that? And I've got this snake that I don't know anything about, being a 12-year-old and not being from down there, and thinking, oh my God, it couldn't have bit me, but it's not a coral snake, but it's got colors like coral snake, this and that. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And then finally, after a couple of days, had to go to the hospital and found out I got bit by a brown recluse
Oh
on
no.
the inside of the thigh down there. But yeah, I mean, even down there on a fishing trip, my brain was towards flipping, looking for snakes as a 12-year-old kid. Down in South Texas, walking along and just finding any trash or debris around the hunting cabin that you could flip. But yeah, that was first ever long nose. That was kind of a cool thing, and so much has changed with the amount of animals that you would find down there, and it's kind of sad. When we need to get a lot of these, and we talked about that last time. We got to get these grassy prairies back in order to get the animals back. We need a lot more fires, and would greatly help. But I don't see that that's ever going to happen with the cross fencing, overgrazing, and everything that's gone on now.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, hopefully there does become more of a focus on that, and we appreciate those little things that we have. And also, what I assume the truck traffic down south when you first started going out there, I mean, what was that like?
Well, it wasn't bad. I mean, back then when they first took the animals off the list, there was a whole bunch of us that would all ran four corners, 16 and 624, and some nights you might have 10 hunters running every direction. And I had a night with your buddy Mike, and we passed each other a couple of times, and of course you get irritated because there's too many people in your little stretch. And he had just gone by, and I found right after he went by, I found a really killer smoking tangerine face, and I had to say, "Look at this, Mike." That was back in probably 1988, somewhere in there, maybe 88, 80. No, it was 88 because I had found four annulata that year. That was a good year to find, finding four in a year for me back then, and that would have been like 1988, and but there wasn't much traffic, but there was a lot of hunters, and you would have to kind of pace yourself a little bit because you could see those headlights, or not headlights but tail lights, up ahead of you, and you try to keep um, a good space in between you, and the snakes crossed like that. I know people worry about it, but the snakes crossed. You did not have all the oil production that we have now. The Eagle Ford Shale just put in so much truck traffic, and there's nights now that 624 area has more traffic than Highway 16, and I've had to go and find other roads, and you can, but you got to get a lot further south and different things like that to get away from the traffic. But there would be so many hunters running that area down there between the naval station and you go down to the naval station and the little bombing station down there, and turn around and come out on 16 and go south about 3 miles, and then come back up 3 miles, and then go 3-4 miles to the east and back out, and then go back up to you know 3-4-5 miles north, get back up by the river, turn around, and then come back down, and you just went back and forth across there. And some nights, and then other nights, you took the little triangle, and you would go take 624 over to 469, and 469 over to 97, and 97 over to 72, and 72 back down to 16. And you can't even do that now. That 97 has so much truck traffic on there. If you see much of anything on that road, it's usually splattered with all the semis coming out of Pleasanton, going to Catula, and then on down, picking up 35, and I guess going to Laredo or wherever they're going. But there's a lot of semi traffic on that now, and you just you didn't have that. It was no big deal to pull a Yui. Now you better be watching real quick because someone's going to be flying around the corner there.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
It just that part has changed, but we used to find a lot of stuff in the '80s. Wet years. I mean, I remember taking that 469, and most people listening to this aren't gonna know, but there's a handful that obviously know where all that is, and finding bullfrogs. It was all of South Texas was flooded and underwater, all out in those flats. All you could see is water, and we were going down there looking for snakes. We weren't finding anything, but we were finding bullfrogs. That's the only year that I have readily found bullfrogs. I know they're down there, but they were just everywhere because all the stock tanks were overflowing. And you're going along and you just see these gigantic bullfrogs hopping down 469 over there between Los Angeles and Millet. And you see it and you go, what the hell is that? You see it jumping in the road and you go, there's a bullfrog, and as kids, as 19-year-old kids or so, it's pretty cool. Found a big old bullfrog, and then you look at it and you go, well, that big old bullfrog's eating everything he can get his mouth on,
Yeah.
including the annulata I'm looking for.
Wow. What a wild thing to see, to kind of see all that culminate together, and then that how that's how it kind of culminated out of it. Pretty interesting to see that.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I feel very fortunate. I grew up in a time where there was just so much wildlife down there, so little traffic, so few of people. Big ranches. A lot of these ranches been busted up now, into smaller acreages and stuff, and so more people down there. But yeah, I was very fortunate. I caught the tail end of a lot of that stuff without all the traffic, and it's kind of scary of how much traffic and how it's gonna possibly make it nowadays. I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one, but I mean, to go down there and and there was plenty of nights where you just didn't see anything. I mean, that part hasn't changed. Or you go down there and you find a one snake or three snake night, but there was every now and then you get in the right weather pattern, and after the right amount of rain, and there was just some banner nights where, I mean, the amount of reptiles and amphibians you'll never ever see again. I mean, there was just, the numbers were there, the amount of checker garters, and stuff was just phenomenal back then, and the amount of atrox. I mean, the Western Diamondbacks were just, certain nights would just be out everywhere, and like I said, I've had numerous nights of Atrox in the 30s. I mean, that wasn't just once or twice. I've done that several times now, and but only once did I ever get into the 70 range, and that was just unheard of. And someone else had told me they had done that one time, and I just thought, oh, horse crap, man, you ain't finding that many damn Western Diamondbacks. And a couple years later, I did it, and I went, oh my God, that's it can be done, but I don't think you could do it anymore. I just don't think it would happen. I think a lot of animals are avoiding these roads now. There's so much traffic that, the vibration and all that stuff. I think a lot of those animals avoid that. I was doing some frog calls for um, Andy Glusenkamp with TPWD when he was a state herpetologist, and I wasn't finding many frogs on the road, but I made some stops. It was after some rain, and I made some stops and rolled down the window, and I could hear all the frogs calling. And what I noticed is they were staying off the road, but when you got down in the ditches, the grasses were just moving everywhere with all these toads and frogs that were breeding and stuff. But they weren't coming up on the road. You'd get an occasional straggler that was coming from one side of the road to the next, crossing. But they were all down in those ditches everywhere, and just kind of makes you wonder. I don't know, maybe crazier than a pet coon, but makes you wonder if the animals that got out on the road been whacked, and you just have a lot more animals now that are staying off the road than there used to be, and it kind of tends to hold true with Alterna. The days of going out and driving and finding the numbers that used to be found are I just don't think you could do that anymore. And I think if you're not getting out and walking the cuts and stuff, I think you have way less of a chance of actually finding an Alterna now compared to the old days of just driving the shoulders. I just don't think they get out on the road as much.
So you think it's more of a, over time, maybe the animals that were more prone to do that have been, modern day predated, and so you don't see that
I
behavior
do.
as much.
I do, yeah. I think
Hmm.
certain animals were more of a wanderer and gave us our gene flow. You see it in white-tailed deer. When I used to manage ranches, you'd have a few bucks that would just travel miles and miles and miles, and they've tagged some now, and the amount that they travel, and then you've got others that just stay in their own backyard and don't do that. And I would tend to think that that holds true across all animal species, and I think a lot of those animals that were genetically wanderers have been splatted pretty well, and you don't have as much of that. But just go down there sometime when you're down in South Texas after a rain, and pull over and get in those ditches and just look at all the frogs everywhere and the toads. And then look to see how few sometimes are out on the road, crossing the road. And you go, man, there's a jillion of them. They're just everywhere. You can hear them. They're all down in here, and you can hear them on the other side of the road, but they're not hopping back and forth across the road, breeding like they once were. And um, I've noticed that here in over the last few years. I mean, it's been going on longer than that, but I can be a slow learner, I think, and it took me a little while to realize 1 and 1 equaled 2. And what got me doing it is trying to get some frog calls on SoundCloud for Andy. I forget, they were working on some type of project, so he said, "Hey, when you're down there, do some frog calls." And so that's what got me doing it. I'm not seeing any frogs, and then all of a sudden I stop at the ditches, and you go, "Man, you can." It's just alive here with frogs, but they're not out on the road. Jerry Salmon and I one night we were going down the road, and so I mean he likes to document every single thing that moves, and so um, we. Uh, we stop and these puddles, and there's frogs all over the place, and although we weren't seeing that many snakes out on the road, there was checker garters as we're standing there. They're just swimming back and forth all over these puddles of water, trying to get the frogs out of there. And but up on the road weren't seeing them, but man, they were all over alongside the road. We'd stop and at one little water hole or something and see 3 4 checker garters coming through the grass trying to catch frogs. And you go, oh, that's pretty cool. Um, they can be really opportunistic. Right? Me and Jerry Merker one time were out taking pictures out on the Boy Scout road, and the scouts were out there. So there's a lot of traffic and a lot of rain several years ago, and so the all the little frogs and toads were being run over, and the black neck garters and the checker garters had come along and they were stuck to the road, like they were hit, but they were thrashing around. And what it was is they started eating one of these little frogs that was mashed down in the asphalt, and they had it partially in them, and they were stuck. And now you're coming along and they're freaking out trying to get going. And then other times you'd see it where they'd peel these dead frog carcasses off the asphalt up there. And we took pictures of it, and I have to, if I can find this sometime. And they would be slithering across the road, and but when you first saw it, you go, "What the hell is that?" And what it was is the frog was dead, because the snake was thrashing trying to get across the road, so you didn't run him over. The little legs were bouncing back and forth, and so the head looked like it was all screwed up. So we had to stop and see what the hell is that we're seeing coming across the road. It's some type of weird dragon snake, but it was, had these little splatted frogs that were doing that, but they were literally just being opportunistic and just peeling them up out of the road, out of the asphalt over there on the Boy Scout road out in Fort Davis. And that was kind of cool to see.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I've seen that behavior in atrox
Hmm.
and eating road-killed lizards that had been killed earlier that day and were jerkified, and watching an atrox pull that up and eat that. And that's one of those, kind of perspective shifting things with keeping, where you go, okay, this is different than what I thought. Or it's
Yeah,
like,
that is really really cool. Now, and I've seen people do that with seeing roadkill rabbits or roadkill mice or rats and atrox getting those. Now, I have not witnessed that, but I mean that's been well documented. But lizard is a big different one deal. I back in the way back when, and again I was probably 10 or 12. I was walking along over going to a friend's house over by Nacogdoches and found a little coffee can next to a yield sign, and stopped, opened it up, and found a fox snake in there. This is we're talking back in the late '70s, and I didn't know what it was. I couldn't tell what it was. I had to find the Peterson field guide and look at the sketch. Go, wow, it's a fox snake, and so I don't know where the hell it came from or anything. And and I had that snake for a while, but we would go and catch these rough green snakes. A buddy of mine had bamboo, and we figured out, I was telling Dusty Rhodes and a couple other people how to find them. If you can find bamboo, you'll find the rough green snakes. You just take a lawn chair and just sit there and stare at it, and eventually a piece of bamboo will move, and you go, oh, there's one, and man, you can find 4 or 5 in the bamboo stands like that. And I had this, and I tell the story, and then one of these days I'm gonna go find me another rough green snake and see if it was just a fluke or what. But I had it in an aquarium with a rat snake. I didn't know any better and stuff. And I would get a pinky. I had a little, I was a little, I don't remember, maybe a little emeries we found, or it might have been a little baby Linheimer. I can't remember now. And I had that rough green snake in there, and I'd throw a pinky in there, and over time I noticed, man, that rough green snake is just fatter than all get out, and that rat snake getting pretty damn thin looking. And one day I realized it was that rough green snake was eating my pinky mice that I was throwing in there, and of course nothing was eating. I was throwing grasshoppers and other stuff in there for the rough green snake, and they were bouncing all over the place. It wasn't catching them. I'd try to do crickets and stuff, but it
Huh.
wasn't really eating because it wasn't hungry. It was chowing down on pinkies, and
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has witnessed that or not, but it was kind of cool to see a rough green snake eating pinkies.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that is interesting, and that's that's another cool thing is snakes that eat insects. As someone that would most of the stuff we keep, it all eats rodents. To see a snake eat a cricket is very cool.
Yeah, yeah,
That but that's interesting that snake was adapting so well to captivity.
yeah.
I don't.
I think Mother Nature does it more than we realize, and it doesn't do it with all animals, but it does it. I think Mother Nature, it has the will to thrive. I mean, most of the time we're the problem, but um, we were talking about being opportunistic, and it was, something moving, and it wasn't part of its normal diet, but it's a visual hunter, and so seeing something move and have an appetite and going, shit, that'll work for me, and and doing that. But like you're saying, an atrox eating a lizard. I mean, that's pretty cool. That's not anything you would think is would happen very often at all. But here it is coming along, going, well, hell, I can either go work my butt off today and try to find something, or I'm going to eat this lizard jerky today.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I believe I have pictures of that. I'll see if I can. I'll see if I can find them. I don't
Yeah,
know where.
that
I don't know where they'd be,
yeah,
but
that would be cool. That'd be a good documentation. You'd look to see if anyone's ever recorded that type of behavior. Maybe a good note to have. Somewhere. I know. Um, finding there's been a few people now finding copperheads up in trees and different things like that. Atrox up in trees. Now, usually when I've seen atrox up in trees, though, it's usually to escape water. I've seen that before down south where big floods and stuff, and a lot of stuff moves up into the mesquites just to get out of the water. They're just tired of the water. Um, and I've seen that, but there's quite a few animals. I know you've seen the videos of the rat snakes chowing down on bats as they're coming out of the caves. Just over here at Bat Cave over here and over here by 3009 and stuff like that. But it happens everywhere out in the hill country, and of course subocs do it. I had a buddy of mine used to go spelunking, and he went about 50 foot down into a cave over by Amistad, and he saw a snake in the cracks and crevices, and didn't know what it was. So I got on my book, started doing it, and as soon as I hit the suboc with the big bug eyes, he goes, "That's it. That's what was in there." And that thing was down 50 feet deep, and he said it was probably 60 degrees at that. And it was just hanging in there, just waiting for a bat to come along so he could nap them, and the temperature, wasn't bothering that snake at all at 60 degrees.
yes, sir. Yeah, yeah. I think that there's a lot of we keep a lot of our snakes too hot in captivity.
I agree. I keep mine a lot cooler, no heat. I know Mike Price keeps a lot of his stuff real cool, but then does add heat. Um, and Joe Tesca had said this way back when he was at the San Antonio Zoo, and someone asked him about keeping dinosaurs and what advice he'd have or how he'd keep them or whatever. And I forget how the question went. And he had that accent, and he said, "Keep them cool, Mom. Keep them cool." Because he took some air conditioning and window unit and made some ducting and piped it in and tried to start cooling the snake house there way back then, before that was happening. And he was one of the earlier people with that, and he had always felt that way, that all of our reptiles we were keeping were way too hot, especially in the snakes. And Berlanderi, not so much. They like it pretty dang toasty, but most of the other stuff we're just keeping it way too hot. And so a lot of stuff. He was one of the early people to try to start cooling that stuff down when he was with the zoo, and he believed that the dinosaurs were a lot cooler than what we thought they were.
Yes, sir. Something to kind of jump forward and isn't, but just again, just following the conversation where it goes and the things that I think are interesting. How has your brumation procedures changed over time with your breeding?
They haven't. But
Really
I'm looking at doing it. Yeah, I'm looking at going colder. I have kept my stuff always at 50 to 55 degrees, going back way back when I was able to uh, take a room of a house I was renting and put a window unit in there, and I figured out how to modify those window units way back in the 80s, and so I could crank it down and get it that cold. But then after that, when I started having separate snake buildings, I've always had very good insulated snake buildings that I would build or rebuild and do it. But I am now going to even go colder for a lot of the stuff I have. A lot of the stuff I have is Arizona Mountain Kings, Alterna, Annulata, that type of stuff. That is Mex Mex, Greer, and that's what's bringing me to it. Is I've gotten dud eggs out of my Greer 2 years in a row, and I've had different males, so I don't think it's a male. And even though I keep my room at 75, I'll let it go a little bit higher after breeding season, but it stays 73 to 75 during breeding season. Um, I think I'm gonna let it go down and get it down, and let it go to somewhere around maybe 35 or 40 before the heater kicks in.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that from people saying that the Greer eye need it to be pretty cold. But I've always done about 3 months. So right around Thanksgiving Day, my stuff goes in. The only changes I made is I used to just flip the switch and they went from 78 to 55, and I thought, yeah, I wouldn't like that. So let me. So now I take a couple of days, and I'll drop it a few degrees each day, to do that. And then I bring them out right around the 1st of March. Occasionally they may come out a week early or a week later, based on the weather. If it's March 1st and there's a big freeze, well, I don't know. Didn't want to spend the money for the to run the heater, so I'll let it go for 5, 6, 7 days, where it gets past a big freeze, and then bring them out, and vice versa. I know a few years ago I brought them out a week early because, we've kind of been going back and forth in these drought conditions, and it was already in the pushing 90 or so, and I thought, well, hell, I might as well just go ahead and bring them out rather than trying to keep it, 50, 55 degrees in there. I'll just go ahead and bring them out a week early. It happens in Mother Nature, but for the most part, man, I have done everything the same. The one thing that I have done with some of our native stuff is when you start looking at, Alterna, Annulata, and there's been times where years ago I bred more Annulata than anybody else. They just people weren't breeding a whole lot of them back then, and I bred a lot of Annulata way back in the 90s. And the if I have an animal that just looks like it's not holding good enough weight for me, I have taken those animals out of hibernation, bring them inside, feed them a mouse or two over a week, and then throw them right back in, and they process that food just fine. They don't it doesn't get stuck in them. They don't get gut rot or anything else like that. Other animals, you'll kill them. It'll rot their stomach. But Annulata and Alterna, they have no problem processing food down in the 50s or 60s. I mean, you could probably feed them in the 50s and they would still process the food at that. I just found that usually if it's that cold, they just tend to not eat. But I will, on a rare occasion, pull something out, feed it. I don't want to deal with it. I like my 3 months off and then throw them back in hibernation.
Yes, sir. Yep. No, I think that's interesting too. Because the first year when I started doing it, was like, hey, just put them out in the garage and check on them, make sure they're doing good, and then 3 months bring them back in, and that worked the first year I did it, and then the subsequent years after that, I was like, I'm just getting dud eggs, uh, you know, terrible offspring, just all dud eggs, failures all around, and then so after that, I switched to artificial cooling, and I saw success, and then the following years I had even better success with different implementations there. But artificial cooling being the number one change there that made a huge difference. I think it just gets too hot now throughout the
Well,
winter.
it does, but there's a group of guys in Florida that struggle to to hibernate. Right, the weather is just not advantageous to get it too cool, and they just let it get dark and let it cool a few degrees, and take them off their food and put them in the dark. And I think the darkness probably has a lot to do with it too, and and they do just fine with that. It takes a couple of years or so for the animals to adjust to that type of schedule, but there's guys that do that without any real good cooling of hibernation. So I don't know. I mean, we all have these ideas, and the first time something doesn't work out, we have a bad year, then we go, oh, I got to change it. I've got to do this. So here I am. I've gotten duds twice out of these Greer, and so I'm going, the hell with it. I'm going to just let it get cool. And a few years ago in the big snowmageddon that they talk about, and they go, oh man, just a hard freeze. But the we lost power and everything, and my building went all the way down to 30 degrees and stayed there for quite some time at 30 degrees, and everything did fine. They got really, everything got very cold. I was real worried about it. Dave Barker was saying, it gets too cold too long. It can cause a problem, but for the most part, everything should be okay. And everything was. I did not lose anything out of that. And luckily, we had the rolling blackout type of deal, and so it would kick on, build up just a little bit of heat, and kind of stayed at that 30, because I mean, if you remember at that time we were down in the 20s, and I think at that I would have lost some stuff, um, and there was nothing I could do about it. I had no electricity. There was no way that I was be able to get a heater, and you couldn't hardly get gasoline to run a generator. I mean, everything was just a mess for that week. But
Yes, sir. Yep.
it
Yeah.
gets
No.
really cold now. So, other animals, your ball python stuff ain't gonna do it. But a lot of, if you're doing a lot of your native stuff, they can take that cold temperature.
Yes, sir. Yeah. No. I do. When we had that happen, there was no rolling blackout or brownout or whatever over here. We didn't have power for 3 days,
Wow.
and I wasn't worried about my native collection, but at that time I kept a little bit more odds and ends, and my wife's gecko collection, and yeah, we ended up moving everything into one room, and I went to HEB, I went to Home Depot, and I was like, oh, I'll buy a generator, but of course there was no generator to buy, and long story short, if you're stuck in a situation where you can't get heat like that, you can buy big terracotta pots and fill them with river rocks and throw them in your smoker in hour rotations and move them in and out of the room every hour, and you can heat a snake room for 3 days with a smoker and some rocks. So
Yeah, that
just
that is that's pretty creative. I have, this is going to sound horrible. I've got like four generators, at
I own a
least.
generator now.
I had
That
them,
will never happen again.
my wife said, "Go get a generator, hook it up." I go, hell, it'll be fine. Just put some clothes on and cover up. I mean, I remember as a kid, we used to have these things would happen, and the air, you get in these rolling brownouts and no air conditioning. You strip down, throw a wet towel over you, and go back to bed. I mean, we made do, and when I had my ranch. It was pretty common to lose power down there quite a bit in those rural areas. And when I first moved down there, the phone line was a party line down there when I had my ranch, and it was wrapped up in my barbed wire fence so that you didn't shred it. They just hung it off the fence and went from fence post to fence post. And there was like four or five of us on one party line, and the old lady across the road, Santos, she was much older and didn't like to hear the phone ring, and so she would just take it off the hook for a few days at the end. People go, "I've been trying to reach her." I go, yeah, the old woman across the street took the phone off the hook again.
What I mean, I guess I'll. What exactly is a party line?
A party line is where you had four or five people on the same phone line, and so you could pick it up and hear your neighbor's conversation or whatever. And
Huh.
yeah, and they let's see, there was one, two, three, four of us on the same party line, and sometimes it would give you a little slightly different ring than your neighbors. You'd have to learn what your ring was. Some did, some didn't, and so when I talk about that, that was not that long ago. That was in 1998, and they still were on a
Oh
party
no.
line, down there. And yeah, the power would go out all the time. When I remember back when we first started hunting out in West Texas, whether it be Langtree or Sanderson, the power would go out, and sometimes go out for a day or two out there in those areas, and so you couldn't get gas. You were just stuck there, and you would go and you'd see people sleeping in the parking lot of Bill Chamberlain's or there in Sanderson, waiting for the power to come on so they could get gas. I remember one time I risked it and said, "Man, I got to go snake hunting." I had that little Isuzu, and so I went all the way from Sanderson to Iran to top off just so I'd have a full tank of gas because it didn't take but a few gallons of gas to do that, so it was worth it. So I did that, and of course, then after I did all of that, and about 4 or 5 hours later, it came back on. So that was a stupid move, but that was one of those deals that we did. And I mean, power would go out and stuff in those towns, and there was no gas to be had, no food, no gas, no nothing. Hotel room in the dark, and that's how it was back in the 80s and 90s. It's a lot better now. And when you got down there by going down there to Big Bend and getting down there on the River Road and stuff, man, all the time the power would go out. The poles back then were real short poles. They were probably, I don't know, they were probably no more than 8 to 10 feet off the ground in some places, and the storm would blow them over and it would short out, cause fires. They've redone a lot of that, but it wasn't all that long ago that the power lines were that low out there in West Texas, and you just that's why I don't know. I don't worry about it. Power goes out, hell, I'll make do. Put on two pairs of socks, four pair of underwear, and I'll be all right.
Yes, sir. Well, and it's so interesting, right? To hear stories like that and to have that mindset and you know, yeah, because when we go out there, the luxuries that we have now, whether it's my radar on my phone where I'm watching actively where storms are going through, and I'm going, hey, check this out. And I can see it. The temperature is on the dash on my car. It tells me which direction I'm going at. I have a field guide in the back. I have all these resources, a cooler with drinks in it and snacks for days. And then it's like, oh yeah, we used to go out there. We didn't have cell phones. The car, I don't know, it would work. I don't have money for gas, and I'm gonna go out there. And just how hardcore the original group was doing it, and you think,
Oh
oh man, I'm
man,
hardcore, but then you hear this story and you're like, man, I'd be a little
no.
scared.
Well, it reminded me. So we used to go and go to Mrs. Baird's Day Old Bakery that they had there, come through in Del Rio and get a bunch of fruit pies and stale cinnamon rolls. I mean, 1,200 calories. You could live off of a fruit pie, right? And get the bread and stuff, and then get a package of bologna and cheese, and just eat a bologna and cheese sandwich, and go like that for days, right? And I remember one time I was out there with John Fraser and him and I, and he had a tendency to be a cheapskate, and he would get like a can of generic beans, right? And he'd eat a bean sandwich, and
Oh,
it was
how
so bad,
English of
man.
him.
Oh God, I mean, it would knock the maggots off of a gut truck, man, and so he got all mad. What the hell did you do with my beans? I didn't do nothing to your beans, man, but I couldn't take it anymore. And so he thought I threw his damn beans out. And he finally found them. They
Uh,
rolled up. He had a camper, had a topper on his Nissan. They rolled way up to the front of that deal and finally found him. But he was furious. He thought I threw his can of beans away because I couldn't take a damn fart no more. But I mean, we would do things like that. I mean, you would go out there on a dime's budget, and bean sandwiches, I've had one, and that's not anything that I mean, because you could get a pack of bologna, even though, bologna's not my favorite. You could get a cheap pack of bologna and a loaf of bread and go and eat out there, for a week, and you just have water. There was one year, it was back in 1991 or 92. Me and another gentleman named Mike Puckett, we were out in West Texas and had a camper, and Cliff Chisholm, a lot of people recognize that name. He was managing the Pecos Hybrid store, which has been closed forever, and Lance Benton was going out there. Cliff and Lance were buddies, and so we were staying at the trailer park that's there, that was also being managed by that, and they had these beef jerky jars, right? That, remember the little jars at the countertop, and you get a piece of beef jerky out for $1 or whatever it was they'd
yes,
sell.
sir. Yes, sir.
And he had those deals, so we rinsed them out, and me and Mike Puckett, we'd come in at daybreak, and we'd throw some tea bags and a thing of water in those beef jerky jars and set them on the hood of the truck. And by the time we woke up at noon or 1 o'clock, there'd be a big old thing of iced tea, and we'd take all this iced tea, and that was our caffeine. We were loading up the cooler with iced tea. And he had this. He was real proud of this heavy duty old Coleman ice chest that had a real hard latch on it and everything. I said, "You better take that inside the trailer, so them coons are gonna get." He goes, "Them coons can't get into there." We woke up the next morning, and there was all these red bologna strings and all these grease stains running down the window and across there. The coons got it open. They drug the bologna. They sat up there on the cab of his truck eating bologna, and it just had all this slimy shit on the deal. And those were the days we would find these deals, and John Fraser was the best at it. He'd always find these deals where you could stay for $5 a night per person in like an old ratty travel trailer with a community shower and stuff. There used to be a deal called Ford Motel when you were going into Frere. He was a taxidermist, and the place was so bad they knocked it down. Those are the types of places you would stay, and you would have to go. It was the same thing at the Pecos High Bridge. You go into the community shower, and the scorpions would be all hanging up on the walls, and so you had to dodge scorpions while you were there in your birthday suit, so you didn't get tagged in an inappropriate location. But we'd always find these places like that, and that's how we started staying in Del Rio, because the hotel there, w- if you told me you're a snake hunter, would give it to you for $15 a night. And that's what it was over in Comstock. But there in Del Rio, you had the places to go, and you could get other stuff, but you had cable, which meant the Weather Channel. And when we used to stay over there in Comstock, there was no TV in those rooms. Bill Chamberlain had no TVs in those rooms. And then if you did take a TV, people would take a TV. You couldn't do nothing with it. You couldn't, you might get a staticky channel with a bunch of tinfoil and a rabbit ear, but you didn't. There was no cable at any of those things back then. And
Yes,
like
sir. Yeah.
Chamberlain's store, when he closed up, that was it. You didn't have. That was the other deal, is you had to get your gas early, because you didn't have credit card swipes at the pumps. So if they decided to go into town and close at Chamberlain's or one of these other deals, you couldn't get gas. There was no way to get gas. So people would always be back then. People would just be spending the night in parking lots waiting for the gas station to open the next day, you know. And so much has changed. But yeah, Mrs. Baird's, man, a lot of herpers hit Mrs. Baird's day old bakery there in Del Rio and load up, and you could come out of there for $10, and you could have somewhere around 20,000 calories for $10.
Well, it's so funny, I think, over time with her being, and I don't know if this is something that you've experienced, but I assume it would be very similar here, where over time, the and this is just life in general, but the times that feel like they suck the most or that are the most disappointing end up being the fondest memories. And
Yeah, adversity does that, doesn't it?
yes,
When you
sir.
have the adversity and you get through it, it yeah, you're right. You're definitely right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always try to remember that. Whether it's in life with your significant other or snake hunting or whatever it is, you go, all right. I know that in the future, this bad memory is actually a wonderful memory, and we got through it and we had a great time, and we found this, and
Yeah.
I think that's important to remember and always just keep herping because as we've covered, you never know when you'll find an alternate. It doesn't matter. It might be the only snake you find that night, but there's a chance.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, and that's the thing is I've got some great stories on the alternative, which makes it really quite interesting. There was years ago. It was my first trip ever down to River Road. It was probably, I don't know, somewhere around that '88 time period, maybe '90, but I think it was probably around 1988. And Cliff wasn't running the hybrid store yet. He was working down there as a waiter and down in Lajitas. And Lance was in school, so he was working. I mean, he might have been a freshman in college at that time or something, but he was working as a lifeguard at the swimming pool or something over there in Lajitas. And so I rolled into Cliff's place at dark, so he'd been hunting and everything, come in there and woke up the next day and I said, "So where's Mexico?" And he says, "Right there." And I said, "Right where?" He said, "Right there." He said, "You're looking at it." And we were so close at that time that I needed to look down. We were right on the river. I was looking into Mexico. And then he told me, he goes, "Hey, you see my burro?" I said, "No." And he said, "Yeah, I got a jackass out there." And I said, "Where?" He said, "Right down there." I said, "There's not one there." He looks, he goes, "Someone borrowed it." And so he used to have this donkey, here's a herper. And he had a donkey he would ride into Mexico to go see some girl over there that he was seeing back then. And people would just borrow his burro and ride it across the river and then bring it back. Well, that was the last time he ever saw it. When I told him, he said, "Yeah, I lost my ass." His donkey was gone. But I mean, it was everything was so different back then. He had a
Yes, sir.
station wagon and a jeep, and got into the I don't know. Did you ever hear about Operation Rock Cut?
I think I am. I think I am familiar with that, but I think for the people that aren't, would you mind explaining it?
So back then, the feds got together and they were convinced that there's all these herpers hunting Big Bend National Park, and yeah, there was a couple people that went in there, shouldn't have done it, and they did, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So they had all this special task force together, and they put all of this together and going after herpers. But what they were doing was trying to incriminate people. They incriminated a pet store in Pleasanton. The guy says, "Hey, I got a suboc from such and such location," which turns out to be a road in Big Bend. Well, nobody knew that, I mean, this guy didn't, and then they bust him, and so they went after Cliff and Lance, because they figure, well, they live down here, so they'll have some type of information. We'll get them to roll over, and they brought in this special task force, this guy named Chris Scott with the National Park Service, and they went after Jerry Salmon, shipped him something that they weren't supposed to ship him, and then turned around and tried to bust him for it. And I figured out the guy was a Fed. Right in the very beginning, I just figured it out. I mean, because if anybody comes to you and tries to get you to break the law, then there's a reason why. And
Sure.
I told Cliff that, and Cliff goes, "Nah, nah, nah. I've known this guy a couple of years." And I said, he's a Fed, and I'll prove it to you. And he said, "Well, you're getting your chance. He just called. He's coming over here." And so the second he walked in the door, I talked about doing all this crazy poaching stuff, And this Fed calls me, and I knew all along, so I set up tape recorders, and I was the one that exposed all that stuff, and I recorded these conversations against the Fed, and they changed the audio tapes. They were bugging things, but they changed them. They were splicing the tapes back together, and the whole thing blew up because when they tried to bring these tapes forward, guess what? I had been taping them when they had been taping me, and I go, well, I've got the originals, and that was not the full conversation. And so they went out and made 43 arrests, made Time magazine. They did a whole story. I've never read Time magazine after that, and I never will, because it was such a lie. It was just Time magazine became a government propaganda tool. It was on CNN and all this stuff, and they took Cliff, who didn't even have a car that ran. He had to borrow a bike from Lance to ride to work in the middle of the desert, and they named him the ringleader of a multi-million-dollar snake smuggling kingpin. That's how it was worded. And that's how they do that. They always got to sell it to the public. And anybody goes into the office over there in Big Bend, they still have it there like it was this great accomplishment. After it was all said and done, they made only 3 cases, because, and when those, they offered the people like a $25 fine and deferred adjudication. So this, well, hell, I'll take that for $25. And that's what they ended up doing. But the feds locked up people. They put Cliff and Lance in jail. They had to ask for food to the judge, and they weren't. They were never. They weren't given food. I know Lance had a pending lawsuit forever and ever against the federal government over that. But it's really funny, because the game warden started asking questions about me, and I thought, well, that's weird. Why would the game warden ask questions about me? And so I called the game warden, and he goes, no, I don't remember doing that. And I said, it was 2 days ago. How the hell would you forget it? I said, it's good information. And he was asking John Frazier and Damon about me, and then they immediately called me. And I said, well, I think it's coming from a Fed. And so once I did that, I knew that now I blew the guy's cover, and so I immediately the next morning called Cliff and Lance down there in Big Bend. They weren't answering, and I called them, and I left this message. I said, Cliff, get out of your house. You're about to be busted. I said, call me. Do not call me from your home phone. It's probably bugged. And they were already sitting on the couch in handcuffs. So they took that. They took the tape. Back then we had a little tape, for the answer machine. They took the tape to use against me for trying to blow their investigation and stuff out of it. But just more of the crazy things that has gone on in the herping world. And the guy came back again, tried to do another sting operation, and I blew his cover a second time. I called him, disguised my voice, and I told him, I said, guess what, dude, your cover's blown again. And oh man, the Fed was furious. By the time it was all said and done, though, when I released these tapes, it caused Tanner, who was the director of the National Park Service, he had to take an early retirement, and all these other agents all lost their job or had to take an early retirement over it. It was just everything they did was completely illegal in this deal to go after 2 or 3 people that were hunting Castellon. I mean, that's what it boiled down to. Is there was just a couple of people going over into Castellon and hunting, which was a road in Big Bend, which they shouldn't have been doing. And they tried to implicate 43 people in there, thinking if we arrest enough people, somebody is gonna try to come forward and save their own ass. But it was funny. I took the Fed out hunting down in South Texas so I could get information on him, and he tried to get me to jump fences, and I wouldn't do it. So when he did that, I got the VIN off of his vehicle, the license plate, and he was stupid enough to leave his wallet there. And so I opened it up and got his driver's license number, and then I turned it over to a private investigator, because you can't go online, and you couldn't track all that stuff back in the early '90s. And so I had a private investigator run it, and then I told him, I said, hey, man, I said, your license plates don't belong on this Nissan Pathfinder, and it's registered here, but the vehicle's registered over there. The plates are from this date, but the vehicle was actually registered over here, and blah, blah, blah. And that's when I told him, I said, dude, your cover's blown. Everyone knows you're a Fed. I've already put the word out, and he was hopping mad, but it was because I took the time, did all the legwork to do that. They were gonna write a book on it one time, and they went after the guy and said, hey, if you the Fed said, if you publish this, we're gonna make it rough on you. So they never did do that, but there's still a lot of the remnants of good old fashioned Operation Rock Cut still out there.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and that I don't think that the modern herper understands that the sacrifices and the stresses that you guys went through to get the freedoms that we have now. So I am greatly appreciative of the effort you put in, and that was a scary and crappy situation to be in. And thanks for being brave through it and pushing through, because guys like me have you to thank for that.
Well, it's funny. I was young back then. I'm not so stupid anymore. And I used to always say, "I'm a U.S. citizen. I have rights." And now I realize, yeah, the only right you have is what you can afford. And
Mm.
the more money you can throw into an attorney, the more with that. But no, there was a lot of sacrifices made across the board. I remember Fernando Cervantes was a game warden, and he was the one just harassing people to no end out in West Texas for snake hunting, and areas where there people just, the whole county has 800 people, and there's only 600 people in town and out in Sanderson and stuff, and it just no reason for the harassment that would go on, and threatening to take people to jail and separate. You talk about separating people, throwing a dad into jail and separating the son from him, because a guy was out snake hunting out in Terrell County, right? And these are the types of things that had happened. And Buzz Ross told me one time. He said, he says he's just a bully. He said, get back in his face and yell and scream at him, and he'll become your friend. And I was out 3 mile west cut of Sanderson one night, and he pulled me over and started harassing me. And my my first wife at the time, she uh, went to sleep, and we sat out there for almost 4 hours along Highway 90, yelling and screaming at each other. And how I never went to jail that night, I have no idea. But we just went at it, just yelling and screaming, and that went on. And ever so often, I'd see her head lift up, and she said that she woke up just every now and then, just thinking that I would be in handcuffs eventually. and, uh,
Oh.
but it did, and how right was that. Um, Once you did that, all of a sudden he'd pull up, "Hey Jeff, how you doing? Seen anything? Oh, I found a lepidus over here. Oh, cool." And he'd get out with his camera and take pictures with you, and how that changed. But it was typically a bully type of deal, that as long as he could get away with that, and a lot of that had gone on. But there's been a lot of fights and struggles across the board of people that had been falsely cited and harassed. Depending on how far out you have listeners, a lot of people don't realize that, as Texas is supposed to be this free state, but yet we've had some of the worst fights and arguments over snake hunting, the legality of snake hunting, and different things. And we started off early on talking about when Alterna and Annulata and all this stuff were protected, and it was just arbitrarily protected. They just said, "Well, we don't want anyone to have these, so it's protected," without the legal authority. And people had to get involved and spent years fighting the government to get these animals that are very abundant, if you know where to find them and how to find them, off of the protected list. And that's something that also has happened. A lot of people, I think, are aware now. Indigos and certain animals like that are now off of the list here. That was another snake, that is very common and had no business being on there. The lyre snake, it there's no real threat to the lyre snake, because the mass majority of all of its habitat is within inside parks or massive ranches that people don't have access to. So there's, the trimorph, is another one that's come off the list, and that was something that Snake Days actually had done. We had a meeting with Andy Glusenkamp when he was a state herpetologist right before he left there, and he said, "Well, if we can look at it and see that there's no threat, we'll look at doing that." And so, unfortunately, Andy left, and then Paul Crump took over. And Paul goes, "Well, I know nothing about this," but I talked to Paul, and he continued to carry the torch. And I know Terry Hibbets was involved in a little bit, and Myra and several people, and they ran the data modeling and showed that. And so, that was one of the deals that Snake Days was able to do, is to get some of these animals off the list. And my goal was to get them off the list, to get them into the hands of breeders, as Dave Barker wrote, The Invisible Ark. Because if you get these animals out there and breed the hell out of them, it takes the stress off of the wild populations. They when there's a whole bunch of them in the hobby. then people don't have to go out and look for them. Sure, there's going to be a few diehards that just love to do that, like I do with Alterna or Annulata. But I don't have to go find an Alterna or Annulata. There's ample amount of them in private collections and breeders that it's far cheaper to buy them than it is to ever go out and spend the gas and the hotel and the food and everything else to go try to find these animals. And so that was kind of the goal when I first pitched that, was to do that. And the state of Texas did a great job with it, and the people that helped out. And then so it's gotten the animals out there. And yeah, there's issues with still with kind of breeding it, but for these guys that were doing it out of state, there's no problem. There's plenty of these animals that are already in collections, and so now it's kind of opened the door, and they're just going to start breeding them and breeding them and breeding them, and you'll see the price come down to something more affordable. And as it does, it takes that stress off those wild populations, and that was the goal. I mean, if they come down to $150 snake eventually, you just don't have the same stress on the wild populations of people wanting to come out and find them, or what was happening back then was poaching them. You're not going to have the poaching and stuff going on that we once had with them.
Yes, sir. Yeah, but a lot of that wasn't. It wasn't poaching. It was the way it should have been, right? And it should have been properly regulated. And not that there weren't people doing wrong, but we should never, judge by the lowest hanging fruit, the lowest common denominator. And definitely snake hunting got wrapped up into that, unfortunately. And again, to the earlier point, thank you for the effort you put in, and guys like you, because I don't think we understand that phones were being bugged. There's multiple people that I speak to that won't speak over the phone now, regardless, because they were so terrified by that situation and lost so much.
Yeah,
And
yeah, no, it's been a big deal. And one of the other things that happened too is, a good example is Jerry Troop back in the early '80s got busted for selling indigos, and the undercover feds kept coming to him over and over and over again for several years, and finally they got up to $1,000 a piece for 8 indigos. That was a lot of money back then, especially for a guy down in Bruni, Texas, right? And so he ended up getting out of it, but they spent several years of trying to entrap him, and it blew up in their face. So sometimes you see this deal and it has the appearance of poaching, and yes, someone does finally cross that line. But like I say, everybody has a price, and that was just a lot of damn money to throw to somebody that type of deal back then, and to spend several years doing it. And again, for anybody listening, if anybody comes to you and tries to get you to break the law, don't do it. There's a reason why, and it's their job to try to get you to do that. But those are the types of things that went on. There's another interesting caveat, and I was going to work on this with another gentleman, and he ended up not doing it. But I had access to some ranches. I had a ranch where I found as many as 5 indigos in a morning, down by Zapata, that I had access to from a friend of mine that recently sold it. But um, it's well documented that a lot of the ranchers brought in Eastern indigos, and so no one's really done it yet. But we were going to do a study and do some DNA sampling and see how much of that DNA goes back to the Eastern indigos, because you will find some animals sometimes that you look at it and it'll have some traits of an Eastern indigo. And so the King Ranch, and it's well documented, the King Ranch brought in lots and lots of Eastern indigos. So there's probably a lot of damage that occurred, with a lot of the animals being taken out of the Eastern indigo range and brought to Texas. And then how many of them survived or not is because everything was a hard release back then, and hard releases don't work very well. But at least some of those animals made it. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of DNA is there. And that was one of my arguments too, is, with knowing what we know and the amount of thousands of indigos that were released and bought and released in Texas, whether the state even had the ability to even regulate that. If you could show that it had a lot of throwbacks to the Eastern. Now, of course, the the feds could, but the the state of Texas was kind of iffy, and that was one of the things I was kind of questioning is do they even have the legality at the time to be able to do that? And but at the end of the day, we never got around to doing that, and I've been fortunate. I've got to work on a lot of different projects, so quite interesting. I know I'm the guy that always makes everyone mad, but I do enjoy getting out with people with different views, as I discussed the last time, and learning from them. I had a range extension for a Cope's great tree frog, and very difficult to differentiate the Copes and just the gray. And Troy Hibbets had figured out by the scales between the toes if you could get one underneath the electronic microscope. So I did, and I took the pictures, and it was Troy Hibbets had figured that out years ago that you could look at these little scales between the toes on the feet on these gray tree frogs. And kind of I always get kind of interested in that. And then the other thing that pops up then is what kind of life do you have when you're looking at damn tree frogs' toes? I'm always too busy for that kind of stuff, it's but somebody takes it, and thank God they do. Somebody takes it to that extreme
Yes, sir.
to figure that out, because it's without it, we don't have it. And Jerry Salmon's another one that spends a lot of time doing that stuff. If anybody gets a chance and wants to know everything there is to know about the history of the gray-banded king snake, I mean, the guy is a walking encyclopedia of history and knowledge when it comes to that, and how he can remember all of that. I have no damn earthly idea.
Well, excellent, excellent. Well, sir, you know what? I think I've almost close to had you over your time here that I asked you for tonight, and my sheet of notes is 3 times as big as when I started it, and so at some point, either me and you have to meet up for a barbecue or a couple drinks at a restaurant, and I don't think our conversations will stop anytime soon. So. I think again, I know this one's going to leave me wanting more and multiple more conversations that I could have with you, and
Well,
we'll have to figure something out.
that's why it's a herpetoculture. I mean, we get together even outside. We may not even be snake hunting. We may run into each other somewhere, and that's what comes up. It is a culture, and that's the way it's supposed to work, and that's why we have the same common interest, and you could just it's like two dogs walking down the street. One dog starts sniffing the butt of the other dog, and the other. It's the same way with with the herpetoculture. Alternative, really, annulata, ball python, whatever it is, and there is a complete culture, and it's like two dogs sniffing each other's butt
It,
when it comes to that.
it is with no shame. Conversations for hours. Well, wonderful. I think we'll call it again tonight, and don't leave the chat right away. But again, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to our future conversations, whatever they might be about.
Not a problem. I greatly appreciate it. It's been very enjoyable, and I thank you very much for allowing me to come on here and share some of this information.
Thanks for taking the time. It means the world to me. All right. Catch you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.